Hello, a warm welcome to this Asia and Pacific Transport Forum. I'd like to welcome ADB developing member country counterparts, donor partners, the ADB transport community, academia, and the private sector to this forum. Now, of course, many of you will have participated in the sessions throughout this week, and I hope you've already had a chance to download the events app. That's the Events Air app. It gives you lots of instructions in order to do so. You'll also get a chance to see some of the slides and presentations our panelists are presenting today. Now, of course, you'll have noticed that this session is being brought to you virtually via Zoom for the first time this year, essentially, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's changed not just the nature of conferences like the ADB's annual AGM, but also the transport and travel sectors. Now, many of you will have tuned in this week, exploring all the various sessions we've had, the impact the pandemic has had on various sectors within transport. It was the aviation industry yesterday and the challenges it faces in taking off during this COVID-19 storm. The ADB also looked at ensuring climate change and disaster resilience in transportation and sustaining road infrastructure and safety. And I think all of you have emerged with a good understanding of some of the challenges and what it will take to surmount them. So in this closing session, we're looking at the future and how to innovate with new technologies like big data and AI, how they will start to play an important role in this transport sector, and whether this pandemic that we're currently experiencing will play a big part in speeding up the use of these new technologies. And we hope, of course, that you'll be asking our panelists many great questions at the end of this session. You can do so in the Q&A function of your Zoom. And you'll also be hearing from the ADB's Vice President, Bambang Susantono, at the end of this session. And he'll be summing up this week for the transportation sector and telling us about next year's events. So without any more delay, I'd like to introduce our panelists for today's session. First off, we have Jaehak. He's the president of the Korea Transport Institute. Welcome, Dr. Oh. We also have Katja Schechtner from the ITF and MIT. Of course, the ITF is part of the OECD. She joins us today too. Welcome. And we have Paul Barter. He's from the LKY School of Public Policy. Welcome, Paul. And finally, we have Stephanie Tsai, the founder and CEO of Thinking Machines. So welcome to all our panelists. I'm very excited about having a great discussion with all of you today. But let me just start with a very quick first question. Really, it's just a way for you all to introduce yourselves to our participants. Just a quick introduction to explain what each of you do in your organizations, a bit about what your organizations do, and just to give us a sense of your expertise in this area. So let's start with Dr. Oh.
Okay, hello, good afternoon. Glad to be here. And I'm from Korea Transport Institute. I'm the president of Korea Transport Institute, KOTI. And the Korea Transport Institute is the national think tank on transport policy and technology research development. I hope today we can have a very useful contribution from our research insight. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Oh. And next up, we go to Katja Schechtner.
Hello and good morning, Magadang Arao. Thank you, Sharanjit, and everyone for having me. I am actually on a dual appointment between the International Transport Forum in Paris and MIT, where I do research in Boston. However, during these times, I'm actually located in Vienna, which is my hometown. So my focus is, when I do research, to actually really develop technologies to keep cities on the move. I'm thinking a lot about how to guide crowds, how to automate transport, how to understand more about urban transport and the future of it. And when I'm with the International Transportation Forum, where we have 60 member countries globally, many of them in Asia, and working lovely with many of the developing member countries of ADB as well, we focus on thinking on how we can shape our policies, how we can think about regulation that helps develop a sustainable transport and also keeps economies running, which I think is particularly important at the moment. Thank you, Sharanjit.
Thank you, Katja. That's great. We can go to Paul next.
Thank you. I'm a researcher and a trainer, and recently also a podcaster in urban transport policy, especially international comparisons, public transport regulation, and in the last 10 years or so, especially parking policy. I've been focusing especially on Asian cities and their transport development since the late 1990s. And I've been based in Singapore since the year 2000. So hello, Sharanjit, we're in the same city at the moment.
That's right, that's almost as long as me. Good to see you, Paul. And finally, we have Stephanie Tsai, the founder and CEO of Thinking Machines.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I'm a data scientist, and Thinking Machines is a data technology company. We build data and AI platforms for private sector organizations, mostly telcos and private equity firms. And a lot of the work we do for the public sector, for the ADB, UNICEF, Philippine government, revolves around the use of big data and AI for public policy. So I'm here to discuss, because as part of our work, we're Waze's research partner in the Philippines, and we've done a ton of work using big data for transit insighting in developing nations. So excited to talk about that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be exciting. Big data and AI certainly will be a theme running through our discussion today. But let me go back to Dr. O. Of course, you say you are from Korea, we know. And Korea is a country that has made incredible advances over the last few decades in terms of becoming an early adopter technologies into its transport systems. So give us a sense of how Korea managed that. I mean, how was it able to include technologies into its planning and system deliveries of the transportation services?
Okay, Sharanjit, first of all, thank you very much for very generous and kind question to my country. Yes, I think I'm very proud. The Korea has, as you know, very successfully managed the investment in transport infrastructure of road, railways, airport, and the seaport, especially very much focused on the promoting public transport systems for the purpose of the supporting economic development and providing safe, fast, and affordable mobility services, especially through public transport-oriented policies and very the efficient national agreement on transport investment and the financing for infrastructure. Korea has become a country with advanced transport system in a relatively short period of time. I think initially starting with the investment in highways and port for economic development, and then the second phase of investment in public transport systems, high-speed railways, and international airport has been followed. Korea is one of the leading countries where the information and communication technology has been adopted in transport system. In 1990s and 2000, intelligent transport system, so-called ITS, has been developed to enhance efficiency in transport operation, especially bus information system and advanced traffic management system has been most beneficiary and popular services from ITS applications. In a rapid emergency, the advancement of the post-industrial revolution, automation, sharing, and integration has been the major trend of technological advancement in transport sector, especially the advancement are supported by new technologies, including artificial intelligence, IoT, big data, and cloud computing. Also, responding to climate change, electrification and hydrogen vehicles are also major technological issues to be addressed. It is expected these technologies can lead to safety improvement, congestion reduction, and environmental conservation. Next slide. Yes. So if I mention some promising areas of the technological application in transport sector, the transport system in Korea, for example, the public transit service improvement from the autonomous driving technology and the innovative shared mobility service from the IoT and big data. Also in these days, the smart logistics delivery, the smart delivery systems, also big data driven, the assisted traffic accident reduction and traffic congestion management. As you know, as you imagine, the transport policy and technological applications in transport system might be very different before and after of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. In the past, the transport policy and the technological solutions are mostly devoted to improve the safety and the congestion problem and the air pollution. But from now on, I think it's the the public health is the very important objective target of the transport system to be tackled from now on. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. O. We can move on to Katja next, because Katja, you talked a little bit about your role at both MIT and the ITF. And of course, you know, both your roles, you essentially showcase the role of data in system improvements and efficiency gains. So give us a sense of, you know, examples of innovation stemming from the global south. I mean, we just heard Dr. O talk about some of the data systems used in South Korea, but what can we learn from Asian data technology and solutions?
Thank you. Yes, I very much enjoyed, as I always do, to see presentations and advancements that Korea made over the time, and I've been working with a lot of lovely researchers from KAIST in the past. Well, there is something that's close to my heart. I've lived for a long time in Asia. I've also spent significant time in Africa and a little bit in Latin America. And I was always impressed how much innovation, both technologically and both kind of informally, happened in the global south. And I was thinking, shouldn't we in the more Western countries in the global north also learn from them? And luckily at the OECD and the International Transport Forum, we just did a study on expanding innovation horizons, where we showcased 12 case studies, many of them stemming from developing member countries of the ADB in Asia, and looking at how are those countries innovative, how do they integrate technology and ideas from many other countries, how do they develop it locally, and how do they implement it to actually make transportation more sustainable, more safe, efficient, and in many ways, and I'll have an example, also better for the people and more healthy. So the big four questions that came up and that we tackled is, first, how can governments in the global south foster innovation? How to embrace a particular strengths of developing countries, which embracing the informal, but at the same time, modernizing transportation networks with it. Think automated jeepney, maybe. Revisiting global practices So how to inspire a new mobility culture? Is there something from Mexico that the Philippines could learn? Or is there something from wonderful examples from Africa and the new drone corridors that we all globally can learn from? And finally, as it's the OECD expanding transportation policies. Could Michelle please cue the next slide? Thank you. As I said, there are 12 very short case studies, easy to read, clear, what does it do, how can it work? But I've picked out 4. I won't go into all of them, but you see, and everybody's familiar with China's success when it comes to an electric transportation future. Then I have examples from India, Vietnam, and Indonesia at the moment. I want to stress just very quickly too, in India, there is, of course, also a shortage of truck drivers. It's a very hard job. You're long times away from the family. And for safety reasons, the trucks must stop where the drivers sleep. So the journey takes very long. Combining clever algorithms with the trucks and the issues of the drivers, a company in India made basically a relay system. A driver takes a truck, he drives half a day, drops it off, hands it over to the next driver. The truck, the infrastructure keeps constantly running, and the truck driver takes another truck, drives it back another half work day, and hands it over to the next driver. He can sleep at home, the trucks are constantly running, and they shortened the delivery time by half, which is an extreme efficiency gain. People are better off, and there's a lot of logistical ballet and algorithms in the background. This is innovation we see from the global south. Brilliant. Similar when we look at Vietnam, at more and more, and many other countries in Asia, in developing, taking the clever idea of having very sustainable transportation, two-wheelers or tricycles, three-wheelers, quick, able to nimble, make them electric, and suddenly you have a very good transportation system. You are sustainable, and as if you use tricycles, if you are clever about the design, it also protects you from the weather, and even more important, it gives you fresh air, which is perfect in the times like this. Thank you very much, Sharanjit.
That's excellent. So interesting to hear all those innovations, Katja. Really quite incredible coming from these, as we say, global south developing countries. Hoping to get into some of the context of that a little later, but we can go to Paul now in Singapore. You mentioned, of course, you've been here in Asia for a long time, and you've got a very long history in this sector, much of it spent right here in the region. So can you briefly outline for us how the use of technology has changed transport? What are some of the innovative solutions that you've seen that will have the biggest impact on reinventing transport over the coming years?
Thank you. Yes, we were talking a lot about innovation, and it reminded me that in my classes and trainings over the years, I often have had a spiel where I talk about how urban transport technology has hardly changed for a century. I used to say that metros, trams, cars, motorcycles, bicycles, they're all, if we went to 1920, we would have seen more or less the same. Of course, so the basics of urban transport are quite old, and up until quite recently, technology has mainly been used in incremental ways, improving the performance, occasionally using old things in new ways, such as bus rapid transit. But I've had to change my spiel in the last few years, because it really does seem that there are some new things going on. It's not so much new modes, although there are a few weird and kooky new modes as well, but it's all of these high-tech IT-based technologies. And they're very, very exciting, and the two previous panelists already mentioned several of them. But just I want to perhaps, a little later on I'll talk about some examples, but in my next round perhaps. But for this round, I'd like to raise a caution perhaps, and also just an appeal that even as we use technology, let's make sure we have our priorities right. So the point I'm trying to make is that there are some key fundamentals in urban transport that the technology won't change and hasn't changed. So technology is opening up new options, and even as it's very exciting, we need to keep these basic physical facts and constraints in mind, even as we're trying to solve problems. So it will always be the case that private motor vehicles, cars, are the most space inefficient and the highest negative impact personal modes of transport. And big cities will inevitably need to avoid having them take over the whole transport system. It's always going to be the case that it's a bad idea to subsidize that mode of transport or to underprice that mode of transport. We always will need to encourage the space efficient modes of transport, such as public transport, bicycles, walking, etc. There's no way around it. Technology can help us to do that better, but these priorities need to be kept in mind. Efficient goods transport needs to be in mind all the time. Katja mentioned a great example from India. We will always need to make sure that we don't let cities sprawl out to huge distances and create long trips for people, especially poor people. We need to make sure that we tackle the tendency that happens that low-income people end up in inaccessible locations with inadequate transport. So these priorities won't go away. By all means, let's use high tech to deal with them. And the good news is there are some great examples of that happening. One more we should mention is that public transport needs to improve. Informal public transport is incredibly common. And there are some opportunities to make sure that informal public transport gets better integrated with the rest of the public transport systems in many places. So these priorities are the same as always, but the good news is we can do them better, but they won't happen on their own. Businesses won't necessarily tackle these fundamental priorities with these technologies. So as societies, we need to urge governments and businesses to be tackling those fundamental priorities, not just what is most profitable.
Well, thank you, Paul. I mean, that's really interesting. You bring up some really good ideas there and food for thought for us. And in fact, it goes really well into my next question to Stephanie. Stephanie, we know you're a self-proclaimed AI innovator. You know, your company is making use of various data sets. Your focus has always gone beyond transport. We just heard Paul saying that we should be a little more cautious in terms of how we use technology. You know, we have to make sure that technology is taken in context. So how do you see the use of data and technologies being an asset when you apply them to the transport and other sectors? Give us a sense of you know, your experience.
Yeah, I completely agree with Paul. Technology investments have a great ROI in a very short time frame. If you compare the amount of time and money it takes to develop, let's say, a transit mobile application versus building a road, right? One takes 3 months, the other might take 3 years. And you could maybe touch the same number of people with it, though they have very different use cases. I kind of want to step back a bit and spend a moment talking about what is artificial intelligence and big data. I've been working in this field for the last 10 years, and it's been really funny to me how it is like a huge buzzword these days, right? Data science is the sexiest job of the 20th century. AI can do this, AI can do that. But the reality is much more, it's both simultaneously less science fiction and more useful than people think it is. So artificial intelligence and big data can be used, and I think it's best used in the transit sector, is as an enabler of better decisions and an enabler of better service delivery. When countries talk about innovation, often the focus is on smart cities, big data, and artificial intelligence. But I want to use this time to talk about how an investment in creating and sharing basic data sets actually leads to huge improvements in multi-sectoral innovation. Let's talk about where I'm based in the Philippines, right? What data sets do we need to make any kind of good decisions? First, we need origin destination data. We need to know where the demand for human transport is. That's missing. That's done mostly with traffic surveys. In the Philippines, Jaehak did their most recent survey, I think 3 years ago, where they had people on toll roads, just like stopping people in vehicles and literally surveying them. The Metro Manila Development Authority, I've hung out with these people where they send out transit analysts with like clickers to stand on intersections, and every time a car crosses this way, click. Every time a car crosses that way, click. And that's where our information comes from on how many vehicles like pass through different intersections. Can we capture this data with digital surveys and automated tollway data? I think that the core, a core piece of decision making is knowing where people want to go and where people are coming from. So getting that data is not AI or big data, but it's useful data. Second, let's talk about public transit route data, right? Let's talk about multimodal transit. In order to innovate on multimodal transit, we must first understand where people are going and what the available routes are, from trains to buses to the very last mile of tricycle, pedestrian, bicycle. In the Philippines, there's no ground truth data set of our bus routes. Never mind how many people are using buses and where they're going to. We don't even know what our capacity is in our public transport system. That's a problem. Then we get to the problems of human movement data. Most private sector organizations focus on private vehicle data. So I work with Waze data sets, and they're great data sets. I get real-time, massive data on road density and jams across the whole country. What I don't see is people and pedestrians, bicyclists. So that urban density metric, that last human, that human metric, human mobility index, that's missing from all private sector data sets. And then we have street level data. So the fifth thing I want to talk about is when we are talking about transit, we're also talking about the built physical environment. So what do we have now? We have Google Street View, and we have LiDAR data sets captured on street level. And these data sets are collected by private companies. These data sets are not really often collected by public sector organizations. What do private sector companies use them for? They use it for determining how to train autonomous vehicles, which I think is great, but again, brings me back to the point where private sector innovation is focused on private vehicles. And what I would love to see is to have the public sector focus on capturing and sharing these data sets to enable origin destination data plus public transport route data would allow the public to create their own mobile apps and mobile services for personal route planning, you know, Waze, but for you, the person, and not you in the vehicle. And when we get street level data from Google Street View and LiDAR data sets training private autonomous vehicles, I would like to think about that differently and see, can we use this to train autonomous public transit vehicles? What about an autonomous bus, right? Where would it go? How would we use it? Oh, sorry, I missed one more source of data that people can use, which is open data contributed by volunteers. So OpenStreetMap, I hope people are familiar with it. It's a fantastic initiative where volunteers put on literally an OpenStreetMap that's open to everybody, locations of anything. So where's the library, where's the bus stop, you know, what building is here, how many houses are there? That is all data that when it hits the open space, the more open data we have, the better we can innovate across sectors. So really my key point is that it is critical for any kind of innovation to build a base of shared transit data sets. And that enables better decisions, that enables better applications, and ultimately that enables really interesting AI applications.
Yeah, that was really fascinating, Stephanie. I really love the fact that, you know, data, there's so many different types of data and
so many
in different ways as well. Really fascinating. In fact, this brings me really well into the next round of our session. And this is the session where, you know, we're looking at implementation practices of technology to try to improve the operational efficiencies in transportation, of course, against the backdrop of COVID-19 as well. Just, you know, how quickly will all of this be hastened as a result? So I'll go next to Dr. Oh again. I mean, it was great to hear what South Korea did really early on to implement and include technology in its transport systems. But tell us a little bit about how research institutions like yours, what kind of role they have played in mainstreaming technology into transportation systems. And for instance, we just heard all of this interesting facts on data. How are you going to try to implement data into the next round and future transport systems in South Korea?
I think it's the if I start with the ITS, as you might remember, ITS became popular from the mid of 1990s, and then actually it was very much the ITS was very much welcomed because we may improve the efficiency of the transport system, operation system, rather than the huge investment of hardware actually. But there was some good achievement, but maybe the little bit the shorter than the expected actually. But especially the safety and the traffic management, and some also the public transportation system operation efficiency. Those are quite successful in Korea actually, especially from the investment development of the ITS. There are available a lot of data set actually from the location-based data, also the public transportation card data, and combined with some the mobile phone data. These are very, very important and useful data set to not only to improve the operation efficiency, but also gives a very good decision making. Gives a good some clues for the travelers to make their own decision on which way to go, when to go, where to go, something like that. You see. So, for example, if I make a small example, in these days the mobile data and mobility data might be now very usefully used to predict the level of the contact of the people gathering or people contact to protect people from the COVID-19 pandemic actually. So such mobile data, mobility data is very good early solution, early focused for how the social distancing measures actually can work successfully, how much, something like that. So we may strengthen the social distancing measures from level 1 to level 2 or level 3, something like this. So those are very, very useful data contribution from the mobile and the mobility data in transport sector actually. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Oh. That's really fascinating. It's great to hear South Korea's point of view, as a very developed part of Asia. But next up, I have a question for Katja about, developing countries. We know they face a real challenge in terms of technology infrastructure. Things like even harnessing data might be a challenge. Things like consistent Wi-Fi signals, and of course costs. It's incredibly expensive to implement some of these things we're talking about. So, Katja, can you explain how governments from developing countries in Asia can ensure successful technology and industry development, as well as implementation of these technologies in their countries? Is there a way forward?
Thank you. I really love the discussion, and if you forgive me, I now have to say and give a compliment to the Asian Development Bank, who in Georgia, with researchers I knew from the past, actually developed a mobile app that tracks people where they go through the transportation system, and automatically, from the way it bumps and from the way it moves, can understand if people are on the bike, or if the people are walking, or if they are taking the informal buses that are in the capital of Georgia too. And out of this, we very quickly get what Stephanie said. We need data about all people moving at a very local level, small cost, with the help. And this is, Michelle, if you could bring up my first slide, thank you. And this is some of our recommendations. It is cooperation with research and industry, and for governments in the South, also go and look and get the support, both from research and private industries and startups, but also institutions like ADB, to not only build the big roads, that's important, but understand how you can use clever technology. And actually, so what I cannot tell you is that it will be any cheaper to build the roads, to build your airports. I mean, it might have some efficiency gains, but you will still have to look at the infrastructure. But on the infrastructure, you know your cultural practices in your country. And it's very quick if you have concession transport services, if you have private transport services, to maybe follow the example of, I'm not sure if you see this, Mexico, the Chatty service. It's in this report. How they use informal buses that we all have. You have them in Manila, you have them everywhere. These small buses that drive people, and they combined it with an application that shows them where the buses are by a driver simply pushing a button, simple GPS, nothing super fancy. And people can book their transportation and go there. So it's better service, it's reliable, people know how much they have to pay, the drivers know how full they are and how much money they can make, and the government also gets, hopefully, some concession money taxes to reinvest, but also can provide, even informally and just with a little technology, better. I have some other examples here that sound a little bit top-down: leave room for bottom-up innovation, coordinate with all government levels. But I really think the first point is support change, and don't be afraid of it. It's all not so expensive. If someone sells you to it at a very high expenses level, they're making money of you. So make sure to probably check another one, check a younger startup. They are great in many ways too, or look and renegotiate with the help of international institutions that can help you understand how much money you actually need to invest in the technical infrastructure. And a lot of it is great policy making. We've seen in other discussions, there is no reason why governments cannot mandate mobile phone companies to not give them the individual data. Of course not. We want to protect the privacy of users everywhere, but just an analysis of the origin destination matrices. And during my time at the Asian Development Bank, I remember doing that for Bangladesh. So it is possible and it is available. Next slide, please. Because in the end, and that's a standing sentence that many of my friends say, first we imagine the future and then we make it so. And it's not the quality of the money, it's the quality of dedication to go there. I know you need money for infrastructure. I know you need support in research and innovation, but don't be afraid. The cost is not so high and there is the knowledge and the support out there. Thank you very much. And I'm really looking forward to be able to coming back to the Philippines, to Laos, to Nepal very soon, and actually see the changes that happened over the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm so impressed how Asia and Southeast Asia in particular handles the COVID pandemic. So I think we should learn from them and not tell them what to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Katja. It's really lovely to hear your enthusiasm for the sector, and particularly what a lot of Asian startups are doing. And you know, you're right, there are so many startups in developing countries that are simply leapfrogged the transport system altogether. You know, you've got Indonesia, a huge country, of course, companies like Gojek, which you mentioned on your slide as well. In fact, that leads me. Go on, if you want to interject and say something, go on.
No, I just wanted to say, yes, of course, Gojek is one of our case studies, because it's amazing how they changed not only being a transport company anymore, but actually being a supportive lifestyle company that helps you fulfill your daily needs. I'm very impressed.
Thanks, Katja. Well, actually, that leads me really nicely into the next question for Paul, because you mentioned about policymakers, Katja, and really, I know, Paul, at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, that's a lot of what many of you do, advising policymakers, giving recommendations, and seeing as we're seeing so much of this sort of leapfrogging technology coming from startups, how do you recommend, authorities, transport companies, to maybe take on these new innovative ways of thinking within their system to sort of encompass more technology within the way they set up their transport systems?
Yeah, so as I said before, the key guiding light has to be these fundamental goals. So always keep them in mind, but I'll give perhaps 3 examples of arenas in which technology is opening up new opportunities to achieve those goals and to further those goals more effectively than in the past. And also removing excuses that have been used in the past to not proceed in some cases. So for example, as I said before, it's always been important that we price motor vehicle use properly, and we don't allow private cars to take over our urban transport systems. They're just too inefficient. They have too many negative impacts, even though, of course, they are popular and useful, but in large numbers in big dense cities, it's just a mess. So we have to price them properly, but that has always been unpopular, and there's been some technological obstacles so that it's not been easy to do that. Singapore was one of the pioneers, but it hasn't been easy. Parking policy is part of that story as well, and I'm very interested in parking policy, and a lot of cities price parking in ways that gets them in trouble. Either the prices are too low in one area, or the same price actually ends up being too high in another area, and it's difficult to adjust the prices. The prices end up much less popular than they need to be. It turns out some experience is being gained in several cities where they're doing this. Using technology, it's become easier to set the right price for parking so that you just have this Goldilocks price. It's not too high, not too low. It's just right to achieve the goal that we want, which is rationing the parking properly. And it turns out if you do that, the parking prices are much less unpopular than they are if the prices are wrong. It's a strange thing. People aren't as much opposed to the pricing as we thought they are. It's just they're opposed to pricing that is irritating them and not working well and not achieving what it's supposed to be doing. So similarly, congestion pricing, only a few cities have done it and they're very wary of it. And the technology is allowing us to do it in a more sophisticated way. And Singapore's moving towards that, and some other cities I think will follow as well, to more sophisticated approaches, so that no longer will technology be the excuse. But this won't happen unless there's a groundswell of support from people, movements, governments. So we need to take action on these priorities. Public transport, of course, is a key priority. Our cities won't work. Even medium-sized cities, not so big cities, need public transport, and we need to do better. But the good news is that technology, high-tech innovation is actually helping to make it easier to build and enable people to use public transport more easily than in the past. There's a whole long list of small things. There's no one thing, but bus priority lanes, camera enforcement of bus priority lanes, vehicle location that makes it easier for people to use apps to find their bus and get to their train, etc. Navigation, wayfinding, even something as boring and unsexy as bus regulation. Katja mentioned the regulatory arrangements for buses in Mexico, right? It's the kind of thing that makes people's eyes glaze over, but behind the scenes, technology is making that easier by making it easier for the control rooms to locate where where the buses are. And so now we can have much more effective bus regulation, and we can maybe even bring in these informal buses into the mainstream sector and make them more effective. Last mile connections are being enabled by all sorts of innovative services which complement public transport. The idea of mobility as a service is complementing public transport. So some of these more sort of so-called sexy services, it's not that there's anything wrong with them, but they work best when they're building on the fundamental thing of cities that are not letting cars get too out of hand, and making sure that there's this core system of efficient public transport. And that brings me just very, very briefly to the issue of road safety for pedestrians, cyclists, and everyone else. And technology is helping there too. And there's some politically difficult things that we could very, very easily do, but we're not. But the technology is there. We can make sure that speeding becomes basically impossible. All vehicles could just be stuck to the speed limit because we've got a system that forces them to stick to it. Why don't we do that? We could do that. That would save enormous numbers of lives. And there's various even more simple things we could be doing, but I should stop there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Paul. I think everything you said made absolute sense. And you know, what really struck me is just the fact that, yeah, technology is making a lot of these things a lot easier, isn't it? And I was also struck by what you said earlier, which is, you know, it's a system, you know, transportation has hardly changed in over a century. You know, the basics of transportation, urban transport, you said, is old. So this goes really nicely into my next question for Stephanie, which is, you know, Stephanie, your work is anything but old. It's all about innovative new ways using technology. So give us examples of where your work has been adopted and the kind of challenges you faced when trying to break the status quo. I mean, do you find it a struggle to recommend new ways of functioning in such a traditional industry like transport? Or do operators, you know, generally welcome and embrace the kind of changes you're recommending?
I think everybody's trying to innovate and grow as they should, right? And so for the transit sector, it's really interesting because I don't believe in implementing AI just for the sake of doing it, right? As Paul was saying, we have to keep our eyes on the goal. The goal is that this is a public service, that this is who are we trying to help and what are we trying to do? And then fit in AI as an enabling layer beneath that. So there are a bunch of core technologies that immediately improve service delivery, governance, and accountability in transport operations. And these are some of the ones that I've seen adopted really well in mostly in cities that have embraced this smart city concept. So this would include things like real-time operations management, tracking all your, let's say, all your rolling stock. Where is it at any given point in time? Intelligent ticketing systems to make the process of like buying tickets and helping nudge people towards the behavior you want to see in terms of using public transport. Predictive maintenance, this is a really great use of machine learning to kind of predict which pieces of equipment, and some of these pieces of equipment are very expensive, are due to be maintained. Route demand forecasting, scheduling and timetabling, those things go together so that you can shift your capacity as people's traffic and transit behavior shift throughout the day, the week, the month, of the year. And then customer analytics and customer service. And this is where transit as an industry intersects with every other industry. All of our private sector clients, all of our public sector clients, everybody's very concerned with customer analytics, understanding how people use their services, and customer service and customer happiness. So for example, chatbots that are able to reply in natural language for any questions and queries you might have. And in these places, right, the private sector is still, interestingly, pretty far ahead. Because the private sector embraces this mindset of not just improving service delivery and building technology for themselves, but creating enabling technologies that other people can openly use. A great example of this are APKs and APIs that allow for external developers to build new experiences on top of your services and tools. So for example, what's an APK, right? So Waze has an APK that allows a non-Waze developer to in a structured and controlled way, bring the Waze experience into their application. So if I am a a company that, a delivery or postal service company, right? And rather than building my own route planning application, I can use Waze's APK within my own application without having to pay them a huge licensing fee or to have to build custom software. They can just say, okay, I want this. I can implement it within 2 or 3 weeks. And now instead of building my own route planning software, I can focus on my postal delivery experience and use somebody else's route planning tool. Same with the Google Maps API. So an API is very similarly a way for external developers to build on top of what you have. So if I as a company or a private or a public sector entity wanted to estimate how long it takes to travel from one point to another at different times of day, I can use the Google Maps API to give me a travel route and estimated time. And the Google Maps API is really interesting because it'll actually tell you, based on their historical analysis of transit patterns, when it would take 40 minutes to get from, let's say, the airport to my office versus when it would take 80 minutes or 90 minutes. And that's very interesting, and that saves everybody from having to reinvent the wheel every time. So this idea of allowing for other people to build on top of what you have built is an idea in the public sector that leads to very, very fast innovation. One example of an innovation that exists in the private sector but has not yet been, I haven't found any good external developer tools for this is for Lyft and Uber, they have their shared rides facilities that allow them to compute multi-passenger routes on the fly. So if you haven't used a shared ride with Uber or Lyft before, what happens is that you can be in a vehicle with 2 other passengers. And if the vehicle has space for 1 more passenger and somebody relatively close to you says that they want to ride and they're getting dropped off somewhere that's relatively close to your drop-off point, Lyft will add them onto your ride and calculate on the fly the rerouting that allows for a pretty optimal experience for all 4 passengers sharing this ride. So if you can think about it as a way that's that allows for a more, it's just more efficient, it's more climate safe, it allows for more people to use the shared resource that it's a car. That's the kind of technology innovation that's happening that I think will be pretty soon in a space where there will be like an API, an automated route planning mechanism to allow everybody to use it. Transit sector adoption, it's still, transport sector adoption is still so early. I really do think that the focus on capturing data and using big data, using AI methods to capture more of the right data to make these decisions, that's where the focus should be towards this goal of service delivery. And maybe my last point is that, you know, data and technology, it's a tool, it's neutral, right? A lot of these challenges are also political and organizational challenges. Tech alone is not going to solve anything. If we're talking about in the Philippines, for example, the bus transit system here, it's very, very messy. That's not just a data and technology challenge. It is a challenge of politics. It is a challenge of organizational willpower to rationalize our bus routes. That I know that initiative has been going on for what, 10 years now, 15 years now? That's like 3 technology generations, right? And with every technology generation that comes up, there are new ways to tackle that challenge. But unless the political issue is addressed, we will not be able to use technology to change.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was really fascinating. And, you know, a lot of those technologies you're talking about, you know, this isn't, you know, something we're looking at in terms of pie in the sky in the future. It's all here now.
It's all here.
We are using and Uber and all of the other things. So it's here and now. So it's just a matter of, you know, perhaps countries or transport authorities learning from some of these lessons that are already with us now. Now, I'd like to actually open up to the participants. Some of you have already, you know, asked some really great questions, and you can see them on the chat. There's a really good question here that it's, you know, open to any of our panelists to answer. And it's a question about, you know, can the use of AI and big data repair the flaws that already exist between transport and land use that have led to the kind of unsustainable cities that we've seen? Or will developers take advantage and continue their unsustainable development practices? So whomever asked that question, it's a great question. And if I could have perhaps one of, any number of you can answer that question. If you could put up your hand so I know who wants to answer it first. Okay, well, Stephanie and Paul. Well, I'll give it to Paul and then to Stephanie.
Okay, I don't think the IT things will solve our past sins. We still need to focus on those fundamentals, but I think that the question kind of assumed that the culprits behind unsustainable development patterns of urban areas were developers. Now, developers respond to the incentives they see. So it's really the responsibility of governments, province, local governments, national governments, to set the right framework in which developers then build buildings. And there are a surprising number of regulations, such as minimum parking requirements. Every building is supposed to build a huge amount of parking, which forces developers to then build unsustainable styles of development. There's also lots of zoning that forces developers to build low density, which forces the sprawl. So I wouldn't make developers necessarily the villains. They will respond to incentives. Now, and I'm not saying they're angels either, right? But it's up to governments to do the right thing. And the technology will help us, of course, to make sure we can match where people are with where they want to go, but it won't magically make things super efficient. It'll be at the margins.
And Stephanie, you wanted to answer that too?
Completely agree with Paul. It's a question of incentives. AI and technology is a tool, but I also want to point out that there are a few recommendations that mean that there are a few recommendations for making AI and technology more sustainable and more aware of the environmental impact. So I've seen organizations work on climate change and geospatial risk modeling using AI. So those types of studies used to be very expensive and very hard to do. So everything from flood modeling to carbon modeling. So the adoption of those technologies and requiring that those technologies be used to generate this ecological impact data as part of a development plan. I think that's a really good idea, and these tools are getting cheaper, more sophisticated, much more easy to use, much more accurate. The second thing is I'm very much an advocate for open data standards in government because it allows for that level of transparency and accountability. It's not just that the developer and the government need to negotiate with each other, it's that they need to bring in the public sector, the public as a stakeholder in the room. And the best way to do that, because when you have a developer, you'll have a representative one there. When you have a government agency, you'll have a representative there. It's too easy for them to just negotiate with each other behind closed doors. But by having open data on these land use survey data sets, ecological impact data sets, if they're open and available for the public to access, that means there is more accountability. And this is another way we can use technology to better governance, really.
Thanks, Stephanie. Did anybody else want to respond to that question? I think Katja and Dr. O. You good with that? Great. Okay, well, let me go to some other questions because there are some.
Can I, Sharanjit, can I just one comment? I think it's the fundamental problem, fundamental flaws between the transport and the land use. I think it's the problem comes from the lack of the coordination. In my experience, the problem is coming from because the land use planner quite often underestimate the importance and the impacts of the transport system. So I think if we have more data on the future impacts, what is the fundamental flaws between the transport and the land use might be quite easily resolved in some sense. That is my comment. Yeah. So it's I recommend encourage the land use planners to understand the future impacts of the transport problems. I think. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O. There's another great question here. I know we talked a lot about these startups, these great innovative young companies, you know, leapfrogging technology and creating new innovative systems within the transportation sector. But this question is, again, to all of you. How can we ensure that technology and innovation is more socially inclusive when we see most of these leading edge solution providers and apps being led, by the private sector? You know, obviously they are focused on a profit-based business model. So how can we make, you know, all of that, you know, incredible technology being harnessed be more socially inclusive?
Can I start first?
Well, I saw Katja put her hand up, so let's hear from Katja and then to Dr.
Katja.
Okay.
Thank you. That's a great question, particularly because it shows how aware we are of the different impacts and possibilities that we have with data. Now, I think we must ask all three actors to ensure more social inclusivity. One, and I've said that in the beginning, governments can just mandate or things that Stephanie said about open data sets. They can share their things so you can be more accountable and it's more accessible to many people. Secondly, industries. I think, yes, industries and private companies are of course looking for the profit, but you also must not forget that it's a lot of new and younger companies, even if they get bought up by the big ones, about people who care what happens with the technology and the people who actually know how to do the programming and what data to use. They know how to achieve both goals. Like, don't leave out those people that are left out, technically women, modes of transportation that do not include a car. So I think the industry is leading the way in many ways. And I have examples for that. Like 2 years ago, we already had 172 million people in the global south who had access to mobile payments and especially micro payments. So with this very small industry, they can participate in the transport sector, they can make clever ideas about their own savings and sharings, and they can move forward. And with this, we can probably also help the, well, the difficulties in leasing small infrastructures like tricycles, like taxis, and empower the taxi drivers more. And generally, and I think this is not something we must, especially living in the Philippines and other countries, the public is very tech savvy and very clever of what data they can and can use and can share. However, and this is something that we push at the World Economic Forum, at the OECD, at many international banks, is like, there must be some revenue coming back via micropayments to the people who generate the data, all of us, so that not only big companies make profit of it. But as Robert said in the past, with very strong examples, very clear examples, it continues to be a ballet, a coordination, a struggle between policymakers, the people who fund the infrastructures, and all of us who do like the little software on top of it. I've seen many great examples to be socially inclusive, and I hope that you will see many more. Thank you.
Thank you, Katja. And I think Dr. O, you wanted to respond to that question too.
Yes, I think it's a good question. Social inclusion is a very, very important issue in the progress of innovating the existing the transport service, mobility service. I think as you know, is the transport industry is usually underpaid, and also mostly the employees are mostly working under the very poor condition actually, and also underpaid. So I think there should be, there'll be some conflict, social conflict between the new industry and the old industry. But however, one good thing is with the innovative new mobility service, usually the general people are having some benefit, in my understanding, usually, but mostly. But however, there is some problem with the existing industry people actually. So I strongly emphasize the balanced development, balanced progress of innovating the mobility service actually. So when we say we are talking about only the technology development. The technology development is not all the issue. I think it's the more important thing is I like say the social welfare, security, the issue, and also the deregulation issue, also the financing, financial support for the startups, also that kind of issue. So I think these are all the aspects, elements need to be more balanced for successful the innovation of the new mobilities, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oh. I just want to open it up. Paul and Stephanie, did you want to address that question too? Or I can move on to the next one. Yeah, we're good? Great, okay. There's another question here, actually, it's addressed to Katja, but I think, again, this is something that all of you could also respond to. It's a question about a presenter yesterday actually mentioning that data collected, you know, and data that's collected that's not used is better not collected at all, because of course you're expending resources trying to collect data, and if it doesn't get used, what's the point? So the question is, do you like to emphasize the quality and relevancy of the data as well? Again, this is something I know Stephanie was also talking about, but whomever would like to answer, you can put your hands up first. Oh, actually, Paul. Okay, let's start with Paul and then we'll go to you, Katja.
Yeah, so my experience with data is very different from Stephanie's in the sense that my early work in urban transport was compiling data that had been collected by other people into manageable sort of sets of data and comparing different cities. And the thing that strikes you when you try to do that or try to read studies of that, or as an exercise, go search for urban transport data and you'll find that we've got this paradox. On the one hand, we're swimming in data, or at least the people who are collecting data like Stephanie and Mr. O are swimming in data. They've got so much real-time data that they don't know what to do with it. But at the same time, we don't have clear comparative data sets such that we can compare what's going on in a big picture sense between, say, Seoul and Manila and Singapore. That's much, much harder than it should be. So it's kind of a lot of a paradox. And for clear policy making, it's the clear perspective on our city and what's going on is also important. I'm not saying that the real-time data is not important. In fact, it's a huge opportunity, but we've got this frustrating mismatch. And by the way, I didn't answer the social equity question, not so much because I don't have anything to say, it's just that it's too big. There's just so much to say and I was afraid of going on for half an hour, so I better not even go there.
Okay, well, let's go to Katja now, who wants to respond to that question as well about data's relevancy.
So first of all, yes, I agree with the person asking the question and also the presenter yesterday. On this. Secondly, also Paul is completely correct. On one hand side, we have potential access to enormous data sets, but on the other hand side, it's very difficult to understand at which level we have to present it to the different people, policymakers, industry, public, so they can actually understand how we use them and how it will impact their lives. MIT Media Lab City Science Group has a very good way to do that. They basically built the city in question out of Lego cubes on a table, and then they project the information and what could happen on top of this table, and then people can stand around it, look at it, and discuss what the impact would be if you put a huge new tower and development there with many, many people. And then you could see the big impact that has on the transportation around it and on the bus stations. And so people can negotiate, okay, where can we put the bus station? It might go around the corner, but it's actually good. It catches more people and you know, those kinds of things. So we have not only to think about the data, the collections, the issues with it, but also how to present it to the public and to different levels. We are transportation specialists. We know probably half of everything, but politicians have to do the same for health, for education. So we have to present it to them very well. And then secondly, just a small fact. Many of the data we use for transportation and mobility statistics and modeling is not collected for this purpose, but it's opportunistic data. It's data we get that's used so that you can make your call and that your mobile network works, or that GPS, the satellites are up there to basically deliver you to V, but it also allows us to know more about people are moving. So a lot of this data is basically, we already saving money and we already making are thrifty by using, cleverly using what's been collected for other issues. So I think, and I really push for that. The future transportation planners, finances, people working in the industry, they need to understand more about what data sources they have, technology, so they can distinguish on what they actually should use and other things where they just sold some fancy packages. Yeah.
Thanks. And I think Stephanie, I saw you put your hand up.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point. I think Paul and Katja have made like very great points on this topic. It's garbage in, garbage out, right? You could have big data, but if you're collecting, I literally have this problem every day. I get 100 megabytes of data from Waze every month telling me where in the Philippines private vehicles are moving and where they're jammed. But that is not complete data. Without the information on where our public sector, public transit routes are, what are our origin, destination, like demand elements, there's no way anybody could do the kind of study that Katja was talking about, a simulation type of study that accurately models what would happen if you put a high-rise development there, if you stop private vehicles from coming into here and develop like a pedestrian walkways there. All of these what ifs rely on having complete data, not just big data and not just opportunistically collected data, but data that is in a common understood format that is complete across all the different questions we need to ask. And that's comparable so that we can learn from each other, from country to country to country. Otherwise, we will never be able to learn from Singapore or Seoul if we cannot align our data sets and decisions with theirs. So this is super important, and why I think an investment in fundamental data gathering and fundamental data governance is actually going to take us much further than self-driving vehicles.
Thank you, Stephanie. And actually, there's another question that you had posed in the chat, and I'm curious to just follow up on that. You said you'd like to share a digital app and managed crowdsourcing, and how this will allow transit organizations to run surveys at a much larger scale.
If I could share a few thoughts on that, and I think Katja had like thoughts of her own to share.
Yes.
So I wanted to take a moment to talk about gathering origin destination data sets, because it is one of the most I would say if you ask me to prioritize, like that would be the #1 thing I think developing nations should attempt to collect. There are a lot of different ways to get origin destination data. Let me just name a few, right? First, travel diaries, where you have a household, you give like a selected sampling across your population of 100,000 households, a travel diary, and ask them to log where they go every single day, grocery, work, and so on. And you use that and aggregate that to build your travel demand model. The second way to do it is you could do a roadside survey where in gas stations, right, or places where people in transit commonly stop, you have a clipboard, you have like a DOTR, you have a Department of Transportation rep with a clipboard and a camera, and you like ask people, where do you come from, where are you going, what are you doing? You could also do surveys for businesses. You could do this same mechanism by going in and asking employers and commercial vehicles, where are you going, what are you doing? You could go into trains, like you have a DOTR employee with a clipboard in the train asking like 10 people every ride where they came from, where they're going to. And all of these surveys, and those are the survey type of methods. All of these surveys, they are strong in different ways. It is really up to the transit authority to determine what is most appropriate for their city. But having done that, you can build digital apps to improve the experience. #1, basic. Instead of doing it on paper, do it as a digital application. So everything goes into a database right away, and you can do aggregate analysis of it right away. #2, instead of having a person there, you could have like a crowdsourced type of experience where, similar to OpenStreetMaps, you invite people to contribute their travel diaries connected to their ID card or something, so you know it's a real person. And then that allows you to scale it up. So instead of surveying 1,000 people for 100,000 pesos, you can now survey like 5,000 people across a much broader socioeconomic range. The second category of data collection techniques for origin destination, they're much more technology oriented in nature. So there's license plate matching, which you can do if you have cameras that can detect license plates. So some countries have automated speed traps. And so this technology is often paired. These two technologies are often paired together. There's vehicle tracing through, again, the use of cameras. But I do think that while those work pretty well, the return on investment is just, it doesn't make sense to me. The ratio of like return to the investment of having to install cameras and install specialized software everywhere is a bit much, but I do want to acknowledge that those exist. So now having talked for a while, I'd like to hand over the mic to Katja.
I think one has to go to the reality in many of the cities or regions in developing countries and think how you can actually cleverly implement technology for people to crowdsource these ways. And as I've said, in Georgia, in Tbilisi, this was done by the city together with help from the Asian Development Bank and researchers from outside who developed an app that automatically tracks where people are going. There are also some pop-up questions. And the way we ensured that many people actually use it was with a little incentive game. You could win something if you participated in this and shared your data very safely. We made sure we had a data ethics panel coming in from the outside. And this helped gather very quickly at a very low cost the mobility data of the city. And what was also very important is to tell the people what would happen, I mean, why we would collect it. Not just to have fun, but to improve some things, some stations. They were thinking of moving a big station from one area to the other area, all these kinds of things. I mean, maybe we should write an ADB blog up to it so that other developing cities can see that this is not expensive, it works, it needs to be tailored to their own city with the maps and stuff, but it works. And if you then have this, you actually can plan, can implement, but you can get a little bit cleverer and the same app and things works to do automated ticketing, that would probably give you bonus points if you walk a lot, if you bicycle, or if you use tricycles or the public transportation, instead of using the CO2 emissions in your car, and make it a little bit more sustainable by using the tickets and also knowing where the revenue comes from. And this is not huge investments. Again, stressing what Stephanie just said, it was so expensive to get transport data, these diaries in the past. Cumbersome. I mean, who wants to stop and stand and do this? That's gotten better. It's got cheaper, but you have to always tailor it to the local context to make it work.
All right, thank you, Katja, and thank you, Stephanie, as well, for presenting that new app that you've come up with, the digital app. It's great to get some feedback on that. But, you know, we're coming to the end of our session, and, you know, it's really curious that, you know, I touched on it at the start, and I'm sure some of you have been talking about it. And certainly it's been the theme all week throughout the sessions of this transportation forum, COVID-19. It hasn't come up that much in our discussion today. So I'm really curious to understand, you know, we've talked a lot about how data can study patterns, can actually inform what needs to be designed as an effective transportation system. Currently, we're seeing, you know, contact tracing apps, you know, as a form of data collection. It in fact is fundamental in trying to inform, you know, if you've come into contact with anyone with COVID. So there's all of these new apps that have had to react to this pandemic. So I'm keen to understand, where do you see this information, these new apps around COVID-19, perhaps informing the new normal for transportation? I mean, let's face it, transportation is about mass rapid transit. It is about, you know, airlines profiting from large numbers of passenger loads. And of course, the new normal suggests that unless an effective vaccine is found for COVID-19, we can't return to that model of mass transit. So we'll need a fundamental change to the industry. So in one sentence, could all of you perhaps tell me your view on how data and technology can help design a new normal for transportation? So who would like to go first?
Yeah, can I?
Okay, let's start with Paul.
Okay, because I started first. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever you know.
Yeah.
Like to take. Okay, let's start with Dr. O, and we'll do it according to the lineup we do.
I think it's to protect the public transportation service from the pandemic crisis is most important challenge in transport sector, I think. So it's there are many measures, many ways how to protect, how to keep the public transport service safe from the pandemic risk. First of all, I think is the basic information. I mean, the crowdedness or congestion station and the train, inside the train is very important, because it helps its people to make a decision when to travel, where to travel, basically. You see, to which mode to ride, something like this. So provide the information, passenger information, transparently, generally given to the people, passengers, is very important. That is the very basic thing. Also, if you have the infection on the train, I think it might be very important or necessary to show to display such information to the people, so the people can act voluntarily, naturally. So that is also very important. So there are many ways to manage, collect and manage, distribute, use the information, the data for the people's safety, I think. If I add one thing, is we are going through the various the analysis of the impacts from the pandemic to the transport sector. But I think most important thing is now it is more important to implement the policies and technologies, not for the suppliers, not for the infrastructure, for the sake of the passengers' safety or the health. That is the most important, the objective of the transport policy and the technology development. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oh. So we're going with order. Let's go to Katja next.
Thank you. I think two big impacts. First, people now learn through COVID that their own actions have a huge impact on the whole society and the whole further movements. And I think this mindset that my own actions or how I use mobility will have an impact on a wider society, and therefore back to me, through my parents, maybe through my grandparents, through my children, is something that people will understand, that we're more connected and linked. And at the same time, as you said, they will see and understand the benefits of health apps, of all those apps, and understand that if they sometimes contribute something, data protected and not abused, it can help everyone to have a safer public transportation system, probably a safer way to get around in your own neighborhoods. I'm pretty sure we will see an impact on urban planning and TUD, transit-oriented development, and communities as well. So while I think we have still a tough time ahead of us at the moment, I think people will understand and learn how technology can help us to keep us safely on the move. And I'm optimistic about that.
Thank you, Katja. Well, let's hear from Paul.
Yes, so just three very quick points. One is that, similar to Mr. Oh's point, that the almost real-time monitoring that many agencies now have the capacity to monitor what's going on, whether it's on public transport or the roads, has been very useful during the pandemic, because we've had huge variations in people traveling. So that's one. Secondly, the pandemic has demonstrated in many cities that there is an enormous amount of flexibility in people's behavior, perhaps more than people would have been willing to admit before the pandemic. But, so just for example, so many people working from home, as you can see I am, we didn't realize how many people would be able to do that. And there's others as well. And a lot of our policy making, we've been reluctant to force people to change their behavior, but maybe we should be bolder. Force is the wrong word, but nudging people to change their behavior. And thirdly, I just want to perhaps push back a little bit on the premise in the question that public transport is especially dangerous. Compared to, say, eating in a restaurant or going to a bar, public transport is relatively safe, especially if people don't talk, especially if they wear masks. Public transport is probably, I'm not going to say I wouldn't say it's completely safe. Certainly there is some risk, but it's far from the most dangerous thing you can do.
And finally, I'll open it to Stephanie.
Yeah, COVID-19 has accelerated everybody's digital and data transformation. Everybody who thought, there's no way we're gonna go work from home, suddenly here we are. Everybody who said, all our equipment has to be on premise, we cannot have people remotely accessing our server as well. Here we are. They had to spin it up all of a sudden. So interestingly, I think that we are going to see in 2021, like more digital transformation, especially in the older, more established sectors than they thought they were going to do in 10 years. What I'm really worried about, though, is in the macro, what will COVID do to people's desire for urban density? Because public transport, I believe that dense urban centers are very climate friendly. If you have density, then your public transit systems can serve more people better. It all just ties together pretty well. And now with everybody's fears, there's the reality, which is that if you spend a lot of time in an enclosed space with very little ventilation, with a lot of people with mouths uncovered talking, you're almost certainly going to catch COVID. But if you're on public transit, if you're not talking, if you're masked, if you kind of keep your hands to yourself, you're probably safe. That there's the reality of that, but there's the perception. Now the perception is any kind of mass gathering of people is now dangerous. I think combating that perception, I can feel that a lot of people in my generation are now going to go look for homes in the suburbs. We've been trapped in our apartments for the last 6 months, and if we ever get out of here, a lot of my friends are saying, I'm going to get a house with a backyard and space. And so we might see more urban sprawl, and the cascading impacts on the way we have to design and think about public transit, pedestrian walkways, urban density. I can't really envision what that would look like yet, but I can feel that the way we talk about density and the way we plan for public transit will change because of people's fears. The Spanish influenza influenced people's behavior and fears and the way they planned cities for 30 years after 1918, right? That might be what we will see with COVID. So, maybe that was a bit of a less optimistic take, but I think we'll rise to the challenge, whatever it is.
Thank you. Well, thank you all, because this pretty much brings us to the end of our session. I wanted to say a big thank you to our expert panelists, Dr. Jaehak, Katja Schechtner, Paul Barter, and Stephanie Tsai. They're all fantastic. If we were on a stage right now, everybody would be applauding, I'm sure, but we are on Zoom, so we're just going to have to do it virtually. Thank you once again to all our fantastic panelists. A really great discussion there, I think. And also thank you to all the participants out there. You've asked some really intriguing, interesting questions to move this debate along. So at this stage, I would like to introduce the Vice President of the ADB. Now, he's been patiently listening in as one of the participants, but he's also filmed a video to give us a closing address to talk about, wrapping up the session that we've had this week, and also talking a little bit about what's expected from next year. So please, everyone, welcome Vice President of the ADB, Bambang Susantono, with his address.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I would like to begin by thanking all of you for actively participating in the Asia and the Pacific Transport Forum. We know that online webinars cannot match the impactful experience of a face-to-face forum. While we are now in a very difficult situation because of the pandemic-related restrictions, this should not stop us from learning. We must continue sharing our knowledge, hearing from our peers, from experts in the field, and those who continue to work for improving transport in Asia and the Pacific. I would like to start by saying that many of the challenges that affected the transport sector before the pandemic are still with us and require our continued attention. This Asia and the Pacific Transport Forum provides the opportunity to address both the existing challenges and to respond to the new emerging new normal arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has affected our lives in so many ways and put much of our daily life profoundly in disarray. Many of our developing member countries still have lockdowns and travel restrictions. As a result, transport sector chief roles to enable the movement of goods and social interactions has come to a halt. The sector is finding itself in a totally unprecedented situation. The bustling movement of urban traffic and global trade routes have given way to eerie calm, and we see roads around the world resembling arteries without blood. As economies are slowly reopening, decisions must be made about how to reactivate the transport sector. This has been one of the goals of this week-long forum, to define both the need to address the existing challenges and blend this with the new normal for transport. We discussed in the forum that the new normal is characterized by modal changes, including the unfortunate accelerated shift from public transport to private vehicles, and also the much more welcome rise of non-motorized transport. We are still waiting to see if these modal option changes are here to stay or in time will give way to how things have been before. Many of our speakers noted that we have a chance to re-emphasize the importance of non-motorized transport and make it a priority going forward. We are also seeing a different trend for transport in logistics. While shipping, aviation, rail, and road freights are down, remaining below the 2019 levels, urban freight is up, driven by the expansions of e-commerce and delivery services. How can ADB build on current areas of support and help countries transition to the new normal? ADB's transport experts at the height of the pandemic have mapped out possible future trends from available data. 4 trends were identified, as shown in the slide, although no single trend dominates or can define the future. Let me discuss the trends that we are identified. For trend 1, in some Asian countries or cities, public transport has returned to pre-pandemic levels. This is encouraging for the simple reasons that it illustrates how essential public transport is in Asia. We must renew our efforts to ensure that public transport systems are safe, reliable, and resilient to future shocks. ADB has always promoted sustainable forms of urban transport and will use our experience to scale up our support in this area. Earlier this year, as an example, ADB signed a $235 million loan to support the development of a bus rapid transit system in Karachi, Pakistan. Trend 2 is interesting, and we will see in the coming months whether it is a lasting changes. It is encouraging to see government-led efforts, be they at the national or city level, to make cycling and walking permanent options. For example, India's Union Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry is advising states to promote non-motorized transport. We have track records of unprecedentedly high bicycle sales in major Asian cities, including Kolkata, Jakarta, Singapore, and Manila. There are also reports from the People's Republic of China where manufacturers are unable to keep up with surging global demands. ADB, even before the pandemic, has been supporting our clients in the promotions of non-motorized transport in cities such as Kathmandu, Phnom Penh, and Hanoi, and will continue to do so through projects such as the development of pedestrian greenways here in Manila. I need to stress here that safe roads are also critical for non-motorized transport success, and this is where the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory, which held its initial workshop this week, can help. They can come up with policy recommendations on how to make our roads safer and more secure for all users. Trend 3, toward increasing reliance on private transport, has received the most attention not only within our sector, but also from concerned policymakers. As can be expected, the bias in favor of private vehicles is higher in developed countries. Developing Asia, in comparison, is still largely dependent on mass transit options due to a lack of purchasing power for private vehicles, excepting two-wheelers. ADB has pursued a dramatic increase in our support for sustainable urban transport. From a low beginning before 2010, urban transport projects now account for over 20% of our sector lending. The final trend on decreased travel demand is a truly global one. Restrictions to safeguard country borders have disincentivized international travel. The rising acceptance of work from home has also served to replace business travel requirements as well as our daily commute. However, there are exceptions to this rule, one of which is the travel bubbles or green lanes established on a bilateral basis. Another exception is domestic travel, which countries across Asia have been promoting strongly as a replacement for international tourism. With so many countries having expansive tourism sectors, the lack of tourist guests have been devastating for their economies. By promoting local tourism, governments can help the sector recover. So what is the next in the new normal, and how does this fit with the existing challenges of the sector? Transport infrastructure and services across Asia and the Pacific are still well short of meeting the demand for movement of people and goods. Equitable access will remain a major thrust for ADB support to our developing member countries and private sector clients. We are working to ensure that, first, the poorest in our urban areas have affordable transport. Second, rural communities have reliable access to markets. And third, the isolated island states or landlocked countries are not disadvantaged by overly burdensome transport costs. New transport systems are required, and old ones must continue to be upgraded. I already highlighted our support for sustainable urban transport in Karachi. This year, ADB has also approved lending for improved rural connectivity and road safety in Bangladesh. In the Pacific, we are helping Kiribati improve inter-island shipping and port facilities, and Nauru build a new climate-resilient port. ADB will continue to address the old transport challenges while embracing the new normal. We will work with our clients and partners to move away from chronic urban congestion, wasted time, and high cost of transportation, be they at the urban, national, or international level. We will continue to embrace new technologies such as intelligent transport systems and utilize big data sets, as was outlined in the session yesterday. We will strive for a greener, less polluting tomorrow, and will actively support the shift to e-mobility. As I have mentioned earlier, we saw some changes to travel behavior in the past months, with transport users reassessing their need for trips, increased frequency in working from home, and distance learning in schools. These changes have triggered some positive effects of the lockdown, particularly the changes in air quality and environmental health. While these positives are far from offsetting all the transport challenges, they do present opportunities to advocate for more environment-friendly green transport options, such as electrification of transport, which ADB has been promoting for years. We are at a unique juncture in the sector where our options are indeed many. We must select the right ones to address the existing transport challenges and the realities of the new normal. We can choose a green recovery, or we can cede the road to private cars. ADB is currently developing the Asean Transport Outlook, which will have governments, transport experts, and development practitioners assess possible scenarios and trends to inform future design and development of transport projects. ADB has been actively supporting our developing member countries fight the pandemic impact, with the direct lending reaching $9.3 billion by the end of July 2020. Specifically for the transport sector, we issued last month a guidance notes on COVID-19 and transport in Asia and the Pacific to provide directions and policy options on how to address short to long-term impacts of the pandemic on all transport subsectors. This is the first among other sector guidance notes to follow, including water, urban, health, and education. In conclusions, the transport sector must continue to address the existing challenges and adapt to the new normal. It is one of the conflicting trends and different lessons. We can shape this into what we want. It can be about realizing the sustainable, livable cities and green transport system, which ADB has prioritized and continue to do so in its transport sector planning and operations. We may be looking at an uncertain future, but together we can decide now to build a better one. Thank you very much.
Once again, thank you to our Vice President of the ADB, Bambang Susantono, who has given us the closing address for this incredible session, and as well as the sessions we've had all week. Finally, though, before we end the session, once again, a very big thank you to all our panelists and some of their great insights today. And I also wanted to mention before we go, the Innovation Challenge. So if any of you have not had a chance to vote for the project that you would like to see become a reality in the Innovation Challenge, well, this is your final chance to do so. So please go and vote. And once again, thank you to everyone today. I'm Sharanjit Leyl. It's been a great pleasure to be your moderator.
Bye, everybody.